So solving quadratic equations, remember quadratics are always the ones that have an x squared in the standard form. They'll always create a parabola heading up or heading down. So what we're looking for when we're solving is where it crosses the x-axis. So solutions to quadratics, there's a real specific definition, and that is where it crosses the x-axis. So we call those the zeros because the x-intercepts, in this case, we have -1, 0, and 2, 0. It's always when y equals 0. So when we are looking for the solutions to a quadratic, whenever it says solve a quadratic equation and we're looking for the x-intercepts, that's why we always are going to be setting this equation or the equation in factored form to 0. Now this form is not going to help us. We're going to need the factored form of this. And so to factor it, remember we're going to go ahead and look at the factors of -2 that add up to -1. Remember there's a little -1 right there. And that would be -2 and +1. So we end up with x minus 2 and x plus 1. So once again, the standard form setting to 0 is not going to help us, but the factored form setting to 0 is going to allow us to use what we know about how multiplying things to get a product of 0 work. The zero product property is why this works. So we know that if we have two numbers and we multiply them together and the answer is 0, either A has to equal 0 or B has to equal 0. So in this case, we have two factors, x minus 2, and this other factor, x plus 1. And since x minus 2 times x plus 1 equals 0, then x minus 2 has to equal 0, or x plus 1 has to equal 0. And then from there, it's pretty easy to see that x would have to be 2 here, and x would have to be -1. So just like our picture that was a couple slides back, the x-intercepts here are -1 and +2. So now we're going to practice, and I've done 3 for you, and once again I would like you to copy them down, pause the video, and then I'm going to explain how it works, okay, to make sure you're on the right track. And if you think you're on the right track, just zip to the answers and you can see all the answers, okay? So here we go. Pause, copy, do the thing. So here we have to find the factors. The factors here are, 3x, so 3x has to equal 0. Or the other factor is x minus 4 has to equal 0. So 3x equaling 0, I know that that 3 has to be multiplied by a 0 to get to 0, so x is 0. But if you don't know that, you can divide both sides by 3, and we end up with 0 divided by 3 is 0, and these cancel each other out. So x has to be 0, and here most of us can see this, but if you want to prove it with some opposite operations, we know that x is equal to 4. Here we have two factors. Here they are. First, we got to set this equal to 0. So x plus 5 has to equal to 0, or 2x plus 1 has to equal to 0. This one I can see in my head. X is equal to -5, because -5 plus 5 is 0. This one I can't. So I'm going to go ahead and go 2x plus 1 is equal to 0 and use my opposite operations to find out what x has to be. So I'm going to subtract 1 to get rid of this +1, and I get 2x equals -1. And then this is a multiplication problem. I can divide by 2, and I find that x has to be -1/2. So the place where this particular one crosses the x-axis is at -5 and -1/2. And then the last one, we actually have to factor this and then set it equal to 0. Well, we can set it equal to 0 first, but we need the factors. So we're going to look for the factors of -24. That added up to -5. You might want to stop it. If you haven't already done this, stop it. We got the factors of 24, 24 and 1, 12 and 2, 8 and 3. 8 and 3 will give me the 5. So I'm going to go ahead and put my 8 and 3, and I've got to think about the fact that negative 8 is going to give me, a negative 8 plus 3 is going to give me the negative 5, so the 8 has to be negative. So here are our factors, and each of them is going to be set equal to 0. So x is 8, and then x plus 3 is equal to 0, so x is negative 3. Key ideas: set it equal to 0, got to use the factored form, and each factor is set equal to 0 and solved.